Gita Gopinath, what would you advise emerging markets to do? We don't have the luxury and the wealth of developed countries. What should an emerging market like India do?
So firstly, Pranay, given how exceptional this crisis is, and given this is what we call a truly exogenous shock, that countries should do the spending that they need to do. So we would expect to see countries running bigger deficits than they have run in the past. Now, the question, of course, is that how much can they do, and how much is affordable? So that depends upon the borrowing costs that countries face. There are still many, even emerging and developing economies that have access to markets, domestic markets and international markets, that can borrow at reasonable rates. And so that's one option. But I think what will be needed as this crisis unfolds is much more concessional financing provided by international institutions. Secondly, it will need aid for many countries. And third, it will need debt relief in general for many poorer nations who at this point are making choices between whether to service their debt or to take care of the health of their people. So it's going to require both more on the fiscal front in many countries and also being supported through international lending of various kinds.
I get the point you're making, and if I can just ask you to be a little more specific, what do you think kind of the level of fiscal or this budget deficit that emerging markets are going to hit, especially for someone like India? What should be the percentage of GDP that we should be spending? How far should we go?
This is going to vary across countries. The way this crisis hits different economies obviously is not uniform. I also would be a little careful about comparing fiscal spending numbers because some of it are above the line, what we call, or below the line, which is some of it is literally fiscal transfers and spending, and some of it is more credit guarantees and loans, which are not exactly do not get into the fiscal deficit numbers. So it's hard to make that a comparison. The way we've looked at the policies that India are doing, firstly, we really commend the government for putting the lockdown in place to contain the spread of the virus. And also, they've been good about targeting the support that they have provided in terms of, getting cash and non-cash forms, food in-kind transfers to people and support to small and medium enterprises. I think what we would say is that the scale could be bigger in the sense that more can be done. And India certainly has the ability to do that, and I'm sure that's being considered. But that would be one area that we would go is in terms of the scale of the interventions.
That's important. That's the scale should have been bigger because the lockdown has been a success, and it's great that we did it early and we stopped foreign travel from coming in very early. That was a great decision. But then, without warning, without any implementation finesse, when you look at the migrants, don't you think more money and food and should have been spent on helping the migrants and forget about fiscal deficit for a while?
So just 2 points. One, like you mentioned, countries have to do containment measures, but at the same time, when they're doing the containment measures, of course, they have to do what's needed to protect people and their livelihoods. And of course, in India, there are many daily wage workers, and you have the migrant workers, so the scale of it is even bigger. The second point is, yes, India can do more in terms of on the fiscal side. It can provide more support. I'm sure the government is thinking about it. I think what we have to keep in mind is that there is always a concern. Okay, as you run bigger deficits, is that going to now bring in scrutiny and other kinds of problems? Now, this is a global shock. We are seeing countries across the world spending. India is no different. Countries are running bigger deficits, and again, India is no different in that matter. So I would expect to see a greater in terms of scale of the support. I would expect to see that go up.
Okay, let's hope that's coming. But Gita Gopinath, you know the Indian economy very well, and you've studied it, you've been here, you've worked with the Kerala government. Very quickly, what step should India take immediately and then say in the near short-term future?
I mean, so Pranay, the steps I will mention are the following, which is one, the priority, of course, has to be health, people's lives. So that would require spending in the health sector, and it's not just now, but going forward, a much stronger health infrastructure is needed. But for this crisis, of course, it's going to call for even more bigger testing capacity, because I don't think this is going away anytime soon. And if you want to resume activity, there's testing, contact tracing, all of that will have to continue. So that's one bucket. The second bucket is getting money into the hands of people who at this point, just have no income and they cannot survive this crisis. And that has to be done at a scale that's appropriate given the crises that the country is facing, pretty much all countries are facing at this time. For small and medium enterprises, also support has been provided to them. I think it's very important that while you ramp up the fiscal spending, that you keep the receipts, which is to be very clear and, in terms of accounting for all the spending that's done, a very transparent accounting of it, both that's off budget and on budget, so that once we are past this crisis, the necessary steps can be taken. And then on the financial side, of course, monetary policy support, we expect more of that to come given the forward guidance of the RBI. But again, also, while you're putting all this liquidity in the system, you also want to make sure that you have the right regulation and supervision to at least keep an eye on the problems that could be building up in terms of non-performing loans in the financial sector. So these, I would say, are some of the steps. And once you're in the recovery phase, you could think of a more general fiscal stimulus, which is on infrastructure and infrastructure building by the public sector, which could also help growth.